English Translation 500 First Contact. Wednesday, 1st September 2010, 14 ME hours.
Greetings, Edward, dear friend.
I still have something to ask before I forget. It is again about the names and terms we receive from you, and use them in our writings and books. Can you tell us another time what this is all about? Unfortunately, in our last conversation, we only dealt with these matters in a private way, so they do not appear in a report of the conversation. But I also greet you, dear friend, and you are most welcome.
Thanks. What is still unclear with the names, designations, and terms?
There are problems with that in relation to the Czech language, because it is said that the names, terms and concepts, etc. cannot be used in Czech because it means that the sentence content cannot be understood, at least in relation to male and female, etc. Subsequently, everything in the Czech language is to be remodeled according to the Czech sense of language. For example, for pléjáren in Czech pléjárenisk, pléjáresk or similar is to be written and spoken, etc.
This cannot and must not be, because our language, from which the Aryan and the German language also originated, is shaped in such a way that names, designations, and terms are given in such a way that they must be written and pronounced in all languages that exist throughout the universe in the same way as they are given in writing and orally by our language. Just as they are given with us, so they are to be used in the German language, as you have also been doing since the beginning of our contacts. In the same way, they must also be used in all other languages in written and oral form. A name, a term, or a designation, etc., given from our language must not be changed in writing or orally, because otherwise completely wrong meanings of names, terms, and designations will result, or complete nonsense without any meaning, as with the pléjárenisk and pléjáresk mentioned before you.
This means that all the names, designations, and terms which I have taken over from you, and use in the German language must be taken over in the same way, in writing and orally in any other earthly language. But what happens if the names, terms, and designations, etc. are written correctly in the language in question, but then put in brackets, and then listed in the language in question?
If this is done, then a fundamental falsification also results from this, which becomes meaningless. So the form of the names, designations, and terms must also not be put in brackets. All names, terms, and designations which originate from our language, and which are also uniform and therefore identical in the German and Swiss German, written and oral languages, cannot be translated into other languages, because the real value of the name, term, and designation is falsified or is completely lost in nonsensical pronouncements.
Then this is also mentioned once. Then I have another question regarding the Czech translation of Guido's book. And yet they fly. You once mentioned that the translation was a very bad one. So the question now is whether the Czech study group should use this bad translation for articles and educational work, etc. Or would it not be better if they used our completely revised new work for this purpose?
As I told you some time ago, our language experts explained that the translation was very bad and not appropriate for the mission. According to this, the Czech translation should not be used for missionary work, and not in any wise. It is appropriate to use only the new and revised work for further translations and excerpts, etc. I have read through this and have also given instructions for it. So I can say that it is a valuable and correct book, which, contrary to what can be said about the existing Czech translation, is not the case. As I myself do not know the Czech language, I cannot judge the whole thing from my own experience, but it is certain that our linguists have a better command of the Czech language than is possible for Earth humans. And what I have said about names, terms, and designations in relation to the Czech language, I have questioned our linguists in accordance with my promise to you, so the answer I have given you corresponds exactly to their explanations.
Thank you. Your explanations should be enough.
If you have not any more questions, we should turn to the Talmud work.
2 more things I have. Recently, a television program was shown regarding the so-called whiplash. Now, such a trauma is not detectable, although many human beings are said to suffer from it after having had a car accident or any other accident. The disability insurance pays a pension for this. Recently, there have been doubts whether there is such a whiplash at all, which is why I would like to know from you as a physician what it is all about, because your medical knowledge, etc., is thousands of years ahead of that of our earthly physicians. As you know, I had a severe head trauma in 1982, which still causes me difficulties today. But I get along very well with the drug calcibrinate, which I unfortunately no longer receive in Switzerland because production has been stopped. So I have to get it abroad.
I know about your head trauma, but I also know that you can control the permanent consequences of it with the mentioned drug. Your cerebral cortex was irreparably damaged by the head trauma, which is why you have to take medication to combat it. So head trauma is real, whereas whiplash is a fantasy and not reality. Whiplash is not a physical injury because it is expressed in psychosomatic symptoms. These can be treated with psychiatric measures and appropriate medication and are curable to a large extent. Truthfully, an alleged whiplash injury caused by imagination corresponds to an impairment caused by unresolved problems in psychological and also in social terms. This means that occurring dizziness, nausea, and disturbances of balance and concentration and pain, as these are wrongly attributed to a non-existing whiplash injury, in any case due to wrong medical diagnosis and assessment, are based on other factors. These usually have nothing to do with an alleged trauma of this kind, but are based on unresolved problems that are expressed psychologically and psychosomatically and cannot be assessed as a form of disability. The causes of dizziness, nausea, and disturbances of concentration and balance, as well as pain of this kind, can very well be resolved and eliminated by reason and rationality, and thus by the thoughts and feelings of the human beings affected by them, provided that they are willing to do so. Unfortunately, however, it is the case with Earth humans, as we have clearly and unambiguously established, that as a rule there is not the will or interest of the psychosomatically afflicted to free themselves and through their own efforts from their imaginations, because they gain financial profit through their alleged suffering through health insurance companies and disability insurance companies, etc. What we have also fathomed is the fact that a large number of Earth humans fraudulently pretend to be suffering in relation to the non-existent whiplash, although they have no complaints whatsoever. And they do this in order to gain financial advantages and not to have to go to a daily work. Mentioned ailments such as concentration and balance problems, dizziness and nausea can be of many different kinds, but never of an alleged whiplash injury, which from a medical point of view actually does not exist. That is why it is also incomprehensible why the earthly physicians cite such nonsense as the alleged whiplash for dizziness, nausea, and disturbances of balance and concentration. Such ailments find their causes in other things. For example, very often in the inner and middle ear, because there is a poor blood circulation, which is why blood-thinning medications usually provide relief. Behavior therapeutically oriented psychotherapy is also useful for those patients who not only fraudulently pretend to be suffering, but are actually suffering. Important is also the personal health, correct and not self-pitying attitude towards suffering, and the will not to let oneself be influenced by suffering when it actually exists. Through one's own thoughts and feelings, such suffering can at least be greatly alleviated or even eliminated.
Whiplash injury is therefore a fantasy product respectively and imagination. But on the other hand, it is also a means to collect a disability pension for something that truly does not exist and also cannot be proven, because psychosomatic symptoms are unprovable. So the malingers and the stupid advocates of whiplash injury will be pleased when I publish your statement on the internet. But now another question. It was asked, why was not it discovered earlier, that Isa Rashid had used old, traditional Christian terms in the translation of the scrolls, whereby things were not represented correctly. Also, it did indeed result that he also omitted important things because these did not fit into his lay priest concept. From my side, I did not know all this at that time, when I prepared the Talmud Emmanuel for publication, and I also had no information from your or Arahat Athersada's side.
That is correct. Of course, we already knew from the outset about the fallibility with regard to the translations and about certain important omissions. Unfortunately, despite his aversion to the erroneous Christian teachings, he was imprisoned in his faith resulting from it. For this was deeply rooted within him, as it is with all religious believers, so he could not completely detach himself from it, as it is usually the case with all believers in religion. Consequently, he could not free himself from it completely, as this is the rule for all religious believers. But concerning his translation errors and omission errors, it is to be said that we deliberately let the whole thing run in the already executed manner because there would have been too much turmoil at that time, and your life would have been endangered even more than it has been. If you had published the entire actual translation of the scroll, through a probability forecast, we fathomed that you would not have withstood everything but rather would have lost your life if you had spread the whole extent of the scroll at that time. Thus, we said nothing about this, and waited until the aggressiveness had smoothed itself, which has now been the case for quite some time. It really was enough already that in the course of the years after the publication of the Talmud Emmanuel, assassination attempts were perpetrated against you, and that you always only very barely escaped all 22 attacks. But now, since the first malicious waves have smoothed themselves, which were raised in certain circles because of the distribution of the book, the time has become ripe to work on the correct translation and to disseminate it. Of course, this will also cause unpleasant reactions in certain religious circles and among believers enslaved to faith in God as well as among all your adversaries. But according to our assessment, this can no longer become a great danger for you.
Of that which you speak with regard to your possibility forecast, of this, you have never said anything to me. Indeed, I knew that Isa Rashid was not able to free himself completely from his faith in God and Jesus, as I have also found out that old, traditional Christian terms were used in the translation of Isa Rashid, but I did not know why you did not say anything about this. Due to the silence of you all, I assumed that everything indeed had its correctness, and that everything corresponded to the contents of the scroll.
That we did not speak with you about this. Our further reason for this lies in the fact that you would not have been in agreement with the publication of the defectiveness of the translation. Consequently, you would have insisted on writing and publishing the whole thing very exactly and correctly. But this, as I already said, you would not have survived, as our probability forecast had yielded. You would have been treacherously murdered through one of the assassination attempts, of which there would have been even more. Noting this in the newly revised and edited Talmud Emmanuel would certainly be appropriate and useful.
You may indeed be right about that, for I probably would have actually rebelled. And making the whole thing clear in an introduction in the Talmud Emmanuel is, indeed, a good idea and necessary.
We knew that you would not have been in agreement with the old publication, which is why we did not mention the defectiveness, as I already said. We also took our probability forecast into consideration, whereby we realized that you would have been assassinated. Do you have any more questions?
I have no more. So then back to work.